is a photo of the military situation in Ukraine, not the Gaza Strip or Israel. No, you are mistaken. This photo was taken in the town of Lac-Mégantic, a peaceful area in the vast Quebec region of Canada. But why is there so much smoke and fire in such a place? To answer this question, let's travel back in time to 2013.
Exploring the incident of a train carrying 26,000 liters of oil losing its brakes, turning into a slow-motion bomb that devastated an entire town.
Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support Con Ha. Let's dive into today. Lac-Mégantic is a small residential area. Here, everyone knows each other. On warm summer days and nights, people often go to sidewalk cafes, sipping hot coffee while chatting leisurely. Beside them, the familiar screech of train wheels sounds close and familiar. For 130 years, the railway has been like a lifeline, connecting this small town to the outside world. However, on the night of July 4 to 5, 2013, the screech of train wheels was no longer as soothing as usual. Instead, it was an unusually sharp, urgent screech, as if warning the residents of an impending disaster. From afar, 5 locomotives sped at a dizzying pace, pulling 72 tank cars full of crude oil, crushing the tracks beneath. The screech of the wheels grew louder and fiercer, mixed with the sound of panicked people. And then, suddenly, the ground shook violently. A deafening explosion rang out, accompanied by a massive wave of heat engulfing everything. That night, the railway was no longer a bridge but brought a horrifying disaster, taking lives and destroying the town in an instant. To better understand this haunting story, let's rewind time a bit, back to 1 hour before the disaster occurred. It was nearly midnight on July 5, 2013, at the Nantes train yard. A train transporting over 8 million liters of crude oil from North Dakota to New Brunswick had stopped after a long journey. The train's operator that day was Tom Harding, an experienced veteran engineer.
After parking the train on the main line, Harding activated the air brake system, set a handbrake, and conducted a thorough inspection. Discovering engine issues and smoke coming from the locomotive, he immediately contacted the traffic control center to report.
To maintain pressure for the train's brake system, Harding left the engine running normally. He then called Richard Loby, the local traffic controller, to report the situation before heading to a nearby hotel to rest. At this point, Harding had no idea that the engine problem was far more serious than he thought. A few hours later, some witnesses reported seeing sparks flare from the train's exhaust pipe. Shortly after,
flames erupted fiercely.
By 11:50 p.m., a piercing alarm sounded, warning of a locomotive fire at the freight yard. Immediately, firefighters quickly arrived at the scene to control the blaze.
Around midnight, when the fire was under control, Richard Loby, the local traffic controller, called to inform Harding that the train had suddenly caught fire.
Harding panicked and asked if anyone had come to handle it.
Loby calmly replied that firefighters had arrived and extinguished the flames. Harding worriedly asked if he should return to the yard, but Loby advised her to rest assured. A few minutes later, at 12:13 a.m., 2 track maintenance workers from the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway Company, abbreviated as NMA, arrived and took over the train. They informed the firefighters that the train was safe, and everyone left the scene believing everything was under control,
thinking the disaster had been averted. But then, that fragile belief was shattered. Shortly after, as a firefighter was on his way home, he was stunned to realize that the very train they had extinguished minutes earlier was speeding through the town at a terrifying pace. No headlights, not even a single horn.
The eerie sight was like a ghost train gliding past before his eyes.
Around 1:15 a.m., that ghost train approached the small town of Lac-Mégantic, about 18 kilometers from Nantes.
Its speed at this point exceeded 95 kilometers per hour, 6 times the permitted limit,
heading straight toward a sharp, short curve right near the town below. A disaster at this point was inevitable. At the beginning, the locomotive and the remote control car still navigated the curve spectacularly.
However, the cushion car did not withstand the excessive force. It immediately derailed and dragged along the 72 crude oil tankers behind it. It's important to note that these 72 tankers were carrying up to 26,000 liters of oil, turning them into activated bombs rather than ordinary freight cars.
And then, what had to happen, happened.
A series of collisions and impacts occurred, creating a horrific explosion that tore through the entire town of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec. Closest to the explosion was the Music Cafe. Amid the chaotic scene, fortunately, the guests narrowly escaped death. But everything within a radius of over 1 kilometer from the explosion's epicenter was completely swept up. The train cars were engulfed in flames, belching black smoke up to 100 meters high, turning the night sky into a sea of raging fire.
However, that was only the prelude to the disaster that would last for the next 48 hours. Most of the train cars were shattered after the collision. The crude oil inside spilled out and spread throughout the streets of Lac-Mégantic, carrying flames that wanted to devour everything in their path,
turning the peaceful town into a sea of fire in an instant.
At 1:47 a.m., Tom Harding was evacuated by authorities from the hotel where he was resting.
Immediately, he contacted Richard Lavery. Both were stunned by the towering wall of fire before them. The disaster struck so suddenly that the residents of Lac-Mégantic were completely caught off guard. They panicked and fled through fire and snow, trying to escape this earthly hell.
Many risked jumping from heights in search of a slim chance of survival. Over 150 firefighters were dispatched to the scene, but due to the intense fire, it took them nearly a day to even approach the blaze. Yes, nearly a day.
Oil from the ruptured tankers continued to leak, making the fire increasingly fierce and difficult to control. Finally, after deploying special firefighting foam from a nearby oil refinery for support,
the firefighters were able to fully contain the fire by the end of Sunday, July 7th, more than 48 hours after the accident occurred. Throughout those 48 hours, the local hospital was on high alert, overflowing with casualties. But notably, during that entire time, only one resident was brought to the hospital with second-degree burns.
It can be said that this disaster was so brutal that the people of Lac-Mégantic had only two choices: either escape with their lives or perish in the sea of fire. Only when the flames subsided did people horrifically realize the terrible destruction left behind. 47 residents of Lac-Mégantic had perished forever, leaving inconsolable pain for their loved ones.
Their bodies were burned beyond recognition. Authorities were forced to use DNA testing to identify them. But there were still 5 others never found, likely completely consumed by the flames.
Regarding infrastructure, nearly half of the town was completely wiped out. The remaining houses also had to be demolished due to severe oil contamination. Over 1,000 people lost their homes. Thousands more were urgently evacuated due to the enveloping fire. Furthermore, the leakage of 26,000 liters of crude oil into the environment caused serious water pollution,
threatening the ecosystem of Lake Trottier and directly affecting the lives of local residents. In an instant, the peaceful town of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, had turned into an earthly hell. However, as the disaster unfolded, Tom Harding remained completely unaware that the train he was operating had caused this horrific tragedy. When notified about the explosion, Harding even flatly denied it to Richard Lapierre over the phone. He believed his train was fine, and that the train involved in the accident was a different one.
It wasn't until an hour later that Lapierre received information from a local taxi driver.
He was stunned to learn that his train had derailed and exploded.
Lapierre then called to inform Harding that it was indeed his train that had caused the disaster.
Harding was completely shocked. Before leaving Farnham, he had checked everything very carefully. Yet this horrific event still occurred. So why did this happen? Was there some error in the operation?
Was this just an unfortunate accident, or were there other reasons?
To answer these questions, let's return to the fateful night of July 5, 2013.
As mentioned, after parking the train at Gardantes, besides activating the air brake system throughout the entire train, Harding also carefully activated the handbrakes to the 5 locomotives, the buffer car, and the first car.
He did this to ensure safety, in case the air brake system failed.
However, because the train was parked on a slope, according to safety regulations, Harding had to brake at least double the number of cars. Meaning instead of just 7 cars, at least 14 cars should have had their handbrakes activated.
But Harding did not do that. Why? Was it because he was too subjectively careless, or was there another reason?
Perhaps because that day he was the only one on duty at the station and he was also too tired after the long journey. Applying the handbrake for each car takes about 3 minutes and requires a lot of effort.
Therefore, he chose to save his strength, skipping this crucial step. This mistake was truly unacceptable. It was like a ticking time bomb waiting to be triggered.
After finishing the handbraking, Harding checked the brake system once more, as usual.
At this point, he should have turned off the air brake system, but Harding forgot. Mistakes just kept piling up, and another important matter was also revealed. Few people knew that, 8 months before the tragedy occurred, that fateful locomotive had been taken for repairs due to engine failure. However, instead of using genuine parts, MMA's management chose a counterfeit, lower quality part to save time and costs. For them, profit was always the top priority.
Since the crude oil transport business was so lucrative, they couldn't let the train sit idle for repairs for too long. And then, as if cursed, on the fateful night of July 4 to 5, 2013, that counterfeit part contributed to this tragedy, causing lubricating oil to leak into the engine, directly triggering the fire.
Fortunately,
the fire department reacted quickly, containing it in time, preventing the flames from spreading.
However, to completely extinguish this fire, the firefighters had to shut down the engine and cut off the air supply to the air brake system.
This action inadvertently removed the last layer of protection for the town of Lac-Mégantic.
No one could have imagined that 72 crude oil-laden cars,
weighing thousands of tons, were about to awaken and turn into a bloodthirsty monster.
As a result, after the fire was extinguished, the firefighters and MMA staff happily left the scene, believing everything was safe. But no, the real tragedy had not yet begun.
The engine stopped, the train's air brake system gradually lost pressure. The 72 cars, weighing thousands of tons, were now only held on the rails by the handbrakes. According to railway safety regulations, when parking a train, especially one carrying dangerous goods, it must be parked on a siding and must have a derail system.
Yet MMA allowed the train to be parked right on the main line.
The consequence was that when the air brake system completely lost pressure, the train rolled freely down a gentle 4-kilometer slope with a gradient of 4 per thousand.
When it reached the curve at Lac-Mégantic, the speed of this monster was sufficient to cause the horrific derailment disaster we know. And there is no doubt, the Lac-Mégantic rail disaster was the result of a lax, unprofessional management system where safety rules were disregarded.
The 181-page report by the National Transportation Safety Board clearly detailed each cause of the incident,
directly criticizing MMA for poor management, unsafe train operation, endangering the community. Canada's federal transportation regulator,
Transport Canada, also bore responsibility for lax oversight, lacking resolve in forcing MMA to comply with safety regulations.
However, to evade responsibility, MMA tried to blame 3 of its employees, Tom Harding, Richard Labrie, and John Demetra, the train operations manager.
These 3 were arrested in 2014 and charged with criminal negligence. The case quickly sparked public outrage. A series of protests took place in front of MMA's headquarters demanding justice for the 47 innocent victims. The people of Lac-Mégantic believe that MMA's top executives were the ones who should face justice.
For many years, local authorities had requested MMA to relocate the rail line and stop transporting dangerous goods through the town. However, MMA ignored these requests, considering them too costly.
During the month-long trial that followed, the defense lawyers argued that all 3 defendants had not received proper safety training.
Everything they did on that fateful night was following the company's procedures and guidelines. Finally, all 3 were acquitted amidst the joy of their colleagues and the people of Lac-Mégantic.
However, this verdict also left many other citizens feeling extremely dissatisfied.
MMA and its main partner, the Canadian Pacific Railway Company, escaped unscathed.
In August 2013, MMA declared bankruptcy in both Canada and the US due to an inability to compensate the victims. The victims later filed a class action lawsuit and received a total of $415 billion in compensation. The Lac-Mégantic tragedy also forced the Canadian and US governments to take action. A series of new safety measures in the railway industry have been issued. including the application of safety standards for train cars, speed limits in residential areas, and mandatory requirements for the use of electronic braking system.
However, more than 10 years have passed, and many of these regulations have not been fully implemented due to lingering economic interest disputes.
The Yangon Lac-Mégantic central area has been rebuilt. Residents have returned to their old hometown, and life seems to have turned a new page. But the wounds from years ago still remain, reminding them of the horrific railway tragedy of that year.
And you, what do you think about the causes of this tragedy? Share with Kanha by leaving a comment below the video.
For now, goodbye and see you again in the next videos on the channel.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.